They say the old mountains remember everything, every whisper, every sin, every secret buried under the Appalachian soil. But none of those memories are as feared as the night the lanterns flickered inside the abandoned Carter cabin. The night someone swore they saw two shadows moving in perfect mirrored harmony, as if one body breathed through two souls. For more than a century, people have told the tale of the twins who married each other, a story steeped in horror, heartbreak, and the kind of love that never should have existed. But this story didn't start with evil. It started with two children who only ever wanted to belong. They say the mountains decide who belongs to them, not the other way around. Long before the Carter twins were born, long before the town of Ash Hollow had a church, a schoolhouse, or even a sheriff, the Appalachians ruled everything: weather, life, death, and the small, fragile hearts of the people who tried to make homes along their ridges. The mountains kept secrets, and they kept the twins too. On the final night of October 1890, the Black Moon night, Margaret Carter went into labor. The wind outside the cabin howled with such force that even the animals hid. The lantern hanging on the cabin beam flickered wildly, casting shadows that jumped across the walls like restless spirits. Midwife Donna Burr, a wide-eyed woman who believed every superstition the mountains muttered, clutched her shawl as she entered. "I heard the owls call 3 times, she whispered nervously, bad omen for a birth. But Samuel Carter, Margaret's husband, was a man hardened by the Civil War, by hunger, by the unforgiving sawmill where he worked his hands to bone. He didn't believe in omens. Owls don't deliver babies," he said sharply. "Do your job." But even he felt something unnatural that night, something electric, something waiting. The labor was long, painful, and filled with Margaret's cries. When the first baby arrived, a boy, tiny, pale, and silent, Donna feared the worst. Before she could speak, a second cry pierced the cabin, a girl. Both babies were placed into Margaret's trembling arms. But the room froze when Samuel, wiping sweat from his brow, saw what Donna was staring at. The twins were holding each other's hands, tightly, as if they had never been separate, as if birth didn't divide them, but simply placed them into the world side by side. Donna Burr stepped back, whispering, "Black Moon twins. Nature don't make things like this unless it wants trouble." Margaret ignored her and kissed her babies. "They're perfect." She breathed, "My Elias, my Elara." Samuel touched their tiny hands. The joined grip was warm. Strangely warm, comforting. He didn't know it then, but that warmth would become both blessing and curse. Elias and Elara grew like saplings nourished by the same rain. Every villager noticed their closeness, but in the early years, it didn't seem unnatural. Not yet. If Elias cried, Elara cried too, even before she saw him. If Elara laughed, Elias burst into giggles without knowing why. When one toddled, the other followed. When one fell, both scraped knees. When one slept, the other curled beside. Margaret often woke in the night to find her children asleep in the same crib, their tiny fingers intertwined, breathing in sync. "They're connected," she would whisper proudly. But Donna Burr, whenever she visited, narrowed her eyes. "Connection's fine," she muttered, "but this is more." Samuel dismissed it. "They're just clothes." Yet even he couldn't explain how the twins knew when he was coming home from the mill. 5 minutes before he appeared, they would crawl to the doorway and wait, every time, or how they always reached for the same toy without a word, or how they mirrored each other's body language perfectly. It was more than closeness, more than instinct. It was like one mind lived in two bodies, and the mountains watched silently as if they approved. By age 7, the twins could run barefoot over rocks without stumbling. They moved with a silent grace, weaving through trees like they were part of the forest itself. They spoke softly, often in half sentences the other finished effortlessly. Villagers tried to ignore their unnatural synchronicity. Appalachia had bigger worries: wolves, failing crops, sudden storms that wiped out whole seasons. Strange things weren't rare. But as the twins grew prettier, quieter, and more inseparable, the whispers began. "That boy ain't right. That girl don't blink normal. They don't talk to other children. They look at you like they see right through your bones." The twins heard none of it. They spent their days wandering the forest, listening to streams, gathering wildflowers, building tiny twig houses only they understood the meaning of. Ilara loved the shade of the pines. Elias loved the sun, warmed stones by the creek. But despite different preferences, they always stayed within arm's reach of each other. It wasn't fear, it was instinct. If Ilara wandered more than 10 steps away, Elias would panic. If Elias climbed too high on rocks, Ilara's knees would shake until he came down. Their mother tried gently separating them during chores, but every attempt ended in tears, or silence so deep it frightened her. Maybe they're meant to be together, Samuel said once, watching them from the porch as they dug a tiny garden together, moving like reflections. Margaret had only nodded, but worry grew in her eyes. As the years passed, their personalities bloomed. Elias became the thoughtful one, quiet, observant, empathetic. He could sense people's moods before they spoke. He often softened conflicts between adults by simply being present, his calmness spreading like warm smoke. His amber eyes seemed older than his years. Ilara, however, was the fire, bold, curious, unafraid of climbing cliffs or chasing storms. She spoke her mind freely, sometimes too sharply. Her emotions were powerful. When she laughed, everyone felt sunlight. When she cried, the cabin felt like winter. But no matter how different they grew, their bond never weakened. They developed a strange habit. Whenever one felt overwhelmed, they would place their foreheads together, soft, intimate, innocent, and breathe slowly until they matched each other. Margaret once saw them doing it after Elias cut his hand. She froze because Ilara's hand was bleeding too. Same place, same cut, same depth. I didn't touch the knife, Ilara insisted, shaking. Margaret bandaged them both, but her fingers trembled as she worked. That night she confessed her fears to Samuel. There's something wrong with them, she whispered. They're bound too tightly. It isn't natural. Samuel placed a hand on her shoulder. They're children, Margaret, our children. I'm scared, she whispered. He kissed her forehead. Love ain't something to fear. But he didn't sleep that night, neither did she. At age 10, the twins finally attended school in Ash Hollow. The teacher, Ms. Westbrook, tried her best to treat them like ordinary children. But it wasn't long before their bond caused trouble. One afternoon, the class was outside during recess. Elias was reading near the fence while Ilara played jump rope with the other girls. A boy named Carl, older, bigger, meaner, approached Elias, calling him strange. You and your sister are creepy, he sneered. Elias didn't respond. He rarely spoke unless necessary. Carl shoved him. At the same instant he crossed the yard. Ilara gasped, grabbing her arm where Elias had been pushed. Carl shoved Elias again, harder this time. Ilara cried out. When Carl raised his hand to strike Elias, Ilara dropped the rope and sprinted across the yard faster than anyone had seen a child run. She threw herself between them, eyes blazing, arms spread. That's my brother, she shouted, breath shaking. Carl snorted, you're freaks. But when he tried to shove her, something strange happened. He stumbled backward as if pushed by an unseen force. He fell hard, cracking his elbow. The children screamed, the teacher ran, Carl cried. The twins simply stared, hands locked together, shaking. Not from anger, but from fear of themselves. That night, Samuel scolded them. You must stay away from fights, he warned. People already talk. We didn't fight, Elias whispered. He heard us. Us, Samuel echoed, frozen. Ilara nodded. When one of us hurts, the other hurts too. Samuel didn't respond. He didn't know how. Rumors spread through Ash Hollow like wildfire in dry brush. They're unnatural. Witch children, bound by something dark. Mothers warned their children not to play with the twins. Men whispered about bad blood. The pastor preached sermons about God's design not meant to be twisted. The twins felt the change immediately. People looked at them longer, spoke to them less, avoided their eyes, and the twins retreated. Back to the woods, back to the mountains, back to each other. Margaret cried many nights, terrified the world was closing in on her children. Samuel, once stoic, grew tense and protective. He escorted them to school, kept a gun near the cabin door, and glared at any townsman who stared too long. But even he couldn't stop the tide of suspicion. The Appalachians were a place where people feared what they didn't understand, and the twins were too mysterious, too connected, too different. When Elias and Ilara turned 12, something happened that sealed their fate in Ash Hollow. A harsh winter storm had knocked out the mill's water wheel, so Samuel was forced to work late repairs. Margaret and the twins waited with lanterns lit, the cabin creaking in the wind. Hours passed, the fire dimmed. Margaret paced the floor anxiously. He should have returned by now, she whispered. Elias suddenly stiffened. Elara gasped. Both grabbed their chests. Papa's hurt, Elias said quietly. What? How do you know? Margaret cried. The twins exchanged a look, an agreement, a secret understanding, and without another word they dashed out into the snowstorm. Margaret ran after them but couldn't keep up. She screamed for them to return, but the wind drowned her voice. The lantern light flickered and vanished into the blizzard. The twins followed some invisible thread through the forest, feet bare, hands numb, crawling under fallen branches and climbing icy rocks until they reached the ravine near the mill. Samuel lay there half buried in snow, unconscious, his leg pinned under a fallen log. Papa! They screamed together. How they lifted the log Margaret would later never understand. Small bodies shouldn't have that strength. But when one twin strained, the other strained too. Two forces, one effort. They dragged Samuel home, screaming for help. By dawn, the entire town had heard the story of how the twins sensed their father's injury. Some called it a miracle. Most called it something else, a sign of witchcraft. Months passed, suspicion grew, and Margaret, already frail, already anxious, fell ill. The sickness took her fast, too fast. On her final night, she called the twins to her bed. My loves, she whispered, voice thin as smoke, stay together, the world. It won't understand you, but you have each other. Elara sobbed against her shoulder. Elias clutched her hand. Margaret's last breath left quietly like a candle flickering out. The twins screamed in unison, same pitch, same heartbreak, same collapse. Even the mountains seemed to echo their grief. Her death changed everything. Samuel shattered into silence. The twins were left motherless, judged, whispered about, isolated, and deeply, deeply alone. After Margaret's death, something inside the twins fused even stronger. They became quieter, more withdrawn, more dependent on each other. Samuel, drowning in grief, tried to separate them gently, encouraging Elias to help at the mill and Elara to help with house chores. But each time he divided them, something disastrous happened. Elias dropped heavy boards, injuring his arm. Elara fainted during chores. Both grew sick when apart too long. Finally, Samuel gave up. Let them be, he sighed. I can't fight what I don't understand. The twins clung to each other like two trees that grew from the same root, but the townsfolk saw it differently. They saw oddity, disturbance, obscenity, and hatred once begun is hard to stop. Before everything fell apart, the twins had one final summer of peace. They spent days by the creek, tossing stones, making up stories, weaving crowns of wildflowers for each other's heads. They lay on the moss, staring at clouds, imagining shapes and futures they didn't know would never come. Elara once whispered, do you think there's a place where people would like us? Elias smiled sadly, maybe, but here. She hesitated, no one wants us. I do, Elias answered simply. She took his hand. You're all I need, she whispered. He squeezed gently. You're all I've ever had. That conversation, simple, innocent, changed nothing in the world, but it changed everything in them. The Appalachian mountains listened. And the future waited, darkening like a coming storm. After Margaret Carter's death, the mountains of Ash Hollow seemed to grow heavier, like a great weight had settled over the ridge, pressing down on everything that breathed beneath it. The summer air, once warm and golden, felt dimmer. The whisper of leaves sounded less like wind and more like morning. The forest, which had always welcomed Elias and Elara as if they were its own children, now watched them with an aching sadness. It was the first time the twins had ever felt truly alone. Samuel Carter moved through the cabin like a ghost. He repaired the roof, chopped wood, hauled water, cooked beans and bread. But it was like watching a man act out the motions of life without the spirit of living. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his voice was cracked and thin, like old rope. The twins didn't blame him. Grief had taken their mother, and it was swallowing their father too. But it left them stranded, tethered to each other more tightly than ever before. If childhood had tied them together out of instinct, grief welded them together out of desperation, and grief, like winter, changes everything. After the night Samuel nearly died in the snow, and the twins sensed his injury, fear in Ash Hollow spread faster than truth ever could. Rumors took root in the soil and sprouted like weeds. The twins can read minds. They called the storm that injured their father They share a soul, unnatural, forbidden. They ain't human in the normal way. The pastor preached fiery sermons every Sunday. God made one soul for one body. Any other arrangement is the work of something foul. Eyes turned toward the Carter family whenever he said that. Some stared with pity. Most stared with disgust. Children whispered when the twins walked into the schoolyard. Adults quieted when they passed the general store. Windows closed when they walked by. The shame fell hardest on Samuel. He tried ignoring the rumors, then he tried fighting them, then he tried drinking them numb. Nothing worked, but the worst part wasn't the whispers, it was the distance. People avoided the twins like they carried sickness in their shadows. And so the twins retreated from a world that no longer had space for them. The forest became their sanctuary. Elias and Ilara spent hours beneath the canopy, wandering deeper into the mountains, places most grown men feared to go. They followed deer trails, explored hidden ravines, and lay beside the creek, listening to water rush over stones older than any human. They found comfort there, quiet there, and, most importantly, each other. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they said nothing at all. Their silences were not empty. They were full of unspoken understanding. Ilara noticed Elias had grown more anxious since Margaret's death. He jumped at sudden noises. He startled when branches snapped. Once, when a crow landed too close, he grabbed Ilara's arm and pulled her back with such force they both tumbled. "What is it?" Ilara whispered, brushing dirt from her dress. "I feel." Watched, Elias muttered, scanning the trees. Ilara squeezed his hand. "We're together. No one can hurt us here." But she didn't look as confident as she sounded, because she felt it too, a strange tension in the woods, like the mountains were holding their breath. One afternoon in late summer, Pastor Alden came to the cabin. Samuel, weary and unshaven, stepped outside to greet him. The twins stayed by the window watching. Pastor Alden removed his hat, placing it respectfully against his chest. "Samuel," he began, "we need to speak about your children." Samuel's jaw tightened. "My children are fine. They're not fine. They need guidance." "From who?" Samuel asked coldly. "You." Pastor Alden swallowed, choosing his words carefully. "They're drawing the wrong kind of attention. People fear what they see, what they hear. They say the twins don't behave like normal siblings." "They're twins," Samuel snapped. "Twins are close." Alden's voice softened. "Close is fine, but something else is happening here, Samuel. Something unhealthy." The twins watched their father's fists clench. Alden continued, "Children their age shouldn't be so attached. It's not proper. Folks are concerned it's becoming sinful." Samuel's breath hitched. It was the first time the rumor had been spoken aloud. "My children are innocent," he said, voice trembling with anger. "I'm not accusing." The pastor replied, "But people talk. They fear the bond. They fear temptation." Samuel's voice cracked. "I will not have you implying something wicked about them." "I'm implying nothing," Alden insisted. "I'm warning you, if you don't separate them, people might force your hand." Samuel's face drained of color. The pastor placed his hat back on his head and said softly, "Keep them apart, for their sake, and yours." The twins watched their father collapse into the rocking chair after Alden left, burying his face in his hands. He cried. They had never seen him cry, and that night everything changed. The next morning, Samuel announced a new rule. "Elias will work with me at the mill. Ilara will stay home helping with chores." The twins froze. It felt like the air had been punched out of their lungs. "No," Ilara whispered. Samuel's face hardened. "It's only for a few hours each day." Elias shook his head slowly. "We can't, you will." Samuel interrupted sharply, voice rising. "For your own good, for all our sakes." Ilara's eyes filled. Elias's hands shook. Samuel stood and slammed his fist on the table. "I said enough. Do what I say." The twins had never defied him, but now they sat in terrified silence. When Elias stepped outside with his father, Ilara grabbed his sleeve. "Don't go." He swallowed. "I don't want to." They pressed their foreheads together, breathing the same breath, matching the same rhythm, until Samuel pulled Elias away. Ilara watched them disappear down the trail. Her chest tightened, her stomach churned, her vision blurred. Within an hour she collapsed to her knees on the cabin floor, unable to breathe. At the mill, Elias dropped a plank and cried out in sudden agony. The foreman shouted at him, but Elias couldn't answer. He felt like pieces of himself had been torn away. By the time Samuel rushed him home, both twins were feverish. Samuel stared at them, one pale, one trembling, and realized with horror that separating them caused physical harm. He whispered into his hands, "What are you two? What have I done?" The next morning he didn't mention the mill again, but the damage was already done. The twins were afraid. Not of separation, but of the world that demanded it. The real turning point came on February 3rd, 1890. A furious winter storm clawed its way across Ash Hollow. Lightning cracked the sky. The wind roared like something living. Snow fell in thick walls that swallowed the forest whole. Inside the Carter cabin, the twins sat huddled under a blanket, the lantern glowing weakly between them. Samuel paced anxiously. He had planned to repair the shed roof that day, but was trapped by the storm. Thunder shook the cabin walls. Elara flinched. Elias squeezed her hand. "You're safe," he whispered. "You are too." She replied. Samuel watched them silently. Part of him felt deep love. Another part felt deep fear. As the storm raged, the twins became restless. Elias stood abruptly, staring at nothing. "Elara," his voice trembled. She froze. "You feel it too." They both pressed their hands to their chests. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. "Papa," Elias said quietly, "please don't go outside tomorrow." Samuel frowned. "Why?" Elara whispered. "The woods don't want you there." He opened his mouth to scold them for superstition, but something in their eyes, pure terror, made him hesitate. But Samuel Carter was a stubborn man, raised to believe fear was weakness. So the next morning, when the storm weakened, he stepped out to check the shed anyway. He never returned. The twins felt Samuel's injury before it even happened. Elias gasped and doubled over, clutching his ribs. Elara screamed, holding her leg. "Papa!" They cried simultaneously. They ran into the woods barefoot, snow stinging their feet. The storm had left the forest disfigured. Trees bent, branches shattered, trails washed out. The wind howled like something grieving. "Papa!" Elara shouted again. No answer. The twins followed a feeling, an inner compass tugging them toward the ravine near the mill. When they found him, Samuel was half buried in snow, his leg crushed under a fallen log, his face pale. Elara dropped to her knees. Elias sobbed. "Papa, please wake up." His eyes fluttered open weakly. How'd you find me?" he whispered. The twins didn't answer, because they didn't know how to explain it. Together, straining with every ounce of strength, they lifted the heavy log enough to drag Samuel free. Two small bodies should not have been able to move that weight. But grief, love, and desperation can create strength beyond reason. They dragged him home through the snow, screaming for help until neighbors arrived. Samuel survived, but the villagers whispered, "No children should find a grown man in a storm like that. They're unnatural. They ain't right." And from that day forward, the twins felt eyes on them everywhere they went. Not kind eyes, not curious eyes, threatening eyes. By the time spring thawed the mountains, Ash Hollow was drowning in suspicion. Parents forbade their children to speak to the twins. Men muttered about mountain curses. Women crossed themselves when Elias and Elara walked by. The pastor's sermons became sharper. Sin begins with too much closeness. It festers in secret. It must be cleansed. The word cleansed hung in the air like smoke. The twins felt the shift, the coldness in voices, the sharpness in eyes, the silent threat building, but they had no one to turn to. Samuel had withdrawn completely, sleeping more than waking, drinking more than speaking. Loss had hollowed him out so deeply that even his love for the twins couldn't pull him from the dark. And so the twins leaned on each other harder, more than ever. On a warm night in early spring, a thunderstorm rolled over the mountains again. Dark, electric, threatening. The twins couldn't sleep. The cabin felt too small, too quiet, too full of ghosts. Elias sat by the window watching the lightning. "Elara," he whispered, "what if something happens to us? What if someone tries to take you away from me?" Elara walked to him slowly, her eyes glistening. "They won't," she said. "They can't. But what if they do?" Elara hesitated, then opened the drawer beside her bed. Inside was a small spool of red string, left over from Margaret's sewing kit. The twins stared at it. "This saved Papa once," Elara whispered. "Maybe it can save us." Elias swallowed. "How?" Elara sat beside him, took his hand and tied the string around his wrist. Then she tied the other end around hers. It was a childish gesture, a desperate one, an innocent one, but it meant everything. In the flicker of lightning, they leaned their foreheads together. "We stay together," Ilara whispered. "Forever," Elias answered. They didn't understand marriage. They didn't know what vows meant. They didn't know what sin or obscenity meant. They only understood survival, and they believed with all their hearts that if they stayed united, nothing could destroy them. They were wrong, because the next morning, as the twins walked through town to buy flour, a hunter saw the red string, saw their joined wrists, saw their closeness, and by sundown, Ash Hollow burned with a new rumor: the Carter twins married each other. The night the world came for the Carter twins began with a silence so heavy, it felt like the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Dawn had not yet touched Appalachia, but something had shifted in the dark. Something old, something final. A storm gathered somewhere beyond the ridges, grumbling like a warning from the earth. Illy and Elsie stood on the porch of the cabin where they had spent their entire lives. The same cabin where they were born, where they had laughed and run through the woods barefoot, where they had sworn forbidden vows no child should ever know. The cabin that now felt like a mausoleum of every choice they'd made, choices the world refused to forgive. A candle flickered between them, casting long shadows across the rough, hewn boards. The twins looked older than their years, only 20, yet marked by a lifetime of isolation, whispers, and sins that had become too heavy to carry. Elsie hugged her arms tight around herself. Their common Illy didn't answer. He had known it long before she spoke. He felt it in the ground, in the air, in his bones. Stories travel fast in the mountains, but fear travels faster. Their marriage had once been a secret sealed deep in the woods, hidden behind lantern light and trembling hands. But secrets in small towns bloom like poison vines, slow, creeping, inevitable. By the time the preacher who had married them fled the mountains, trembling and pale, it was already too late. Illy watched the dark tree line. Somewhere out there, dogs barked, sharp, agitated, like they sensed a kind of darkness men couldn't. "We won't run," Illy said quietly. Elsie turned toward him, panic rising. "They'll kill you, you know that." "Maybe," he said, "but they won't take you. I won't let them." Lightning flashed behind the mountains in a jagged white streak. The storm was getting closer. Illy had always known he was meant to protect his twin. He had felt it the way roots feel the soil, wordless, instinctive. Elsie wasn't just his sister. For better or worse, she was the other half of his existence. A mirror, a shadow, a breath tied to his own. People said the mountains shaped their children into strange things, that the isolation carved hunger into the soul. But Illy knew the truth. It wasn't the mountains that twisted them. It was the people who lived beyond them. Those who judged without understanding, those who pointed fingers because it was easier than offering a hand. They weren't monsters. They were abandoned children who had only each other to cling to, still. The world didn't see it that way, and in 1890 Appalachia, the world didn't forgive. The first lanterns appeared between the trees just after 3 in the morning, small, glowing orbs bobbing through the dark forest, followed by the shapes of men carrying shotguns, torches, rope. Dozens of them, some Illy recognized: the blacksmith, the mill worker, the old man who ran the general store. Men who used to smile at him when he brought in fresh, cut timber. Men who once asked him to share a drink. Men whose eyes had changed the moment the truth seeped from the cracks of the mountain. Taste of hatred was unmistakable. Elsie trembled as she watched the lights inch closer, her breathing sharp and shallow. "Illy, what do we do?" Illy took her hand. "You stay behind me, no matter what happens." She shook her head violently. "I won't let him take you." But Illy only squeezed her fingers and stepped forward. Thunder cracked overhead. Before the mob reached the clearing, before the night swallowed them whole, Illy felt something, like a memory rising from the earth itself. The trees on the east ridge bent slightly in the wind. The same ridge where old Nathan Carter, their father, was buried. A cruel man, a drunk, a ghost whose presence lingered even after death. He had raised them with fists and snarls, leaving scars deeper than any mountain root could reach. Some said Nathan Carter's cruelty had shaped the twins, had broken something inside them long before they ever broke the law of God. Maybe that was true. Maybe the sins of the parent lived forever in the children. But Ellie refused to believe he was nothing more than his father's shadow. He squeezed Elsie's hand tighter. "I ain't him," he whispered, "and you ain't what they say." Her eyes glimmered with tears. Lightning struck again, illuminating the mob at the edge of the clearing. Then a rifle fired, a warning shot. The sound tore through the forest. Elsie gasped. The night had arrived at their doorstep. The blacksmith stepped forward. He was a mountain of a man, beard thick with rain, eyes burning with disgust and righteousness. "Ellie Carter," he bellowed, "bring out your sister." Ellie stepped down from the porch, rain beginning to sprinkle through the canopy above. "She ain't going anywhere." The blacksmith spat. "We warned your family years ago. We told your pa this would happen if he didn't raise you right." Ellie felt heat rise in his chest. "My pa ain't part of this. You're wrong." The blacksmith snapped. "He made you monsters. Now we're here to clean it up." The words stung, not because they were true, but because the mob needed them to be true. People always needed a story that made them look like heroes. Behind Elsie stepped forward, her small voice cracking, "We ain't monsters." Her words only ignited the mob further. A woman in the group shrieked, covering her face like she was staring at the devil. "She's with child," gasps, murmurs, a low wave of horror that shifted through the crowd like wind through grass. Ellie's body tensed. Elsie flinched as if the accusation were a stone thrown at her. The blacksmith's voice grew louder. "Step aside, boy, we'll take care of this." Ellie shook his head. "Over my dead body." It was the wrong thing to say, or maybe it was the only thing. The sky split open in a roar of thunder, releasing rain so fast it drowned the lantern flames. Darkness swallowed the clearing. The mob shouted, stumbling, men raising guns blindly. In that violent flash of lightning, Ellie grabbed Elsie's hand. "Run." But she froze. "Where?" "Anywhere that ain't here." He tried to pull her, but she dragged him back. "I'm not leaving you." Another shot rang out. This one wasn't a warning. The bullet tore into the porch post inches from Ellie's face. Wood exploded. Elsie screamed. The mob surged forward. Ellie shoved her behind him. "Go," but it was too late. Hands grabbed him. Rough, furious hands that tore at his clothes, his hair, his arms. He fought, but years of chopping wood couldn't compete with 20 men fueled by fear and rage. They dragged him into the mud, pinning him down. Elsie's screams pierced the storm. "Stop, please, leave him alone." They didn't. The blacksmith slammed his boot onto Ellie's chest. "Hold him." Ellie gasped for air. Elsie threw herself at them, wild and desperate. "Let him go." Someone grabbed her by the hair and ripped her back. She fell to her knees. Ellie roared, thrashing, "Don't touch her." But the rain drowned his voice. The blacksmith raised his shotgun, barrel pointed directly at Ellie's heart. "God forgive you, boy, and God forgive us for what we gotta do." Time slowed. Ellie looked past the blacksmith to Elsie, rain pouring down her face like tears from the sky. In that moment, he knew the truth. There was no saving him. There was only saving her. With the last strength in his body, Ellie wrenched free one arm and reached toward her. "Elsie." Her voice broke. "Ellie, please, don't leave me." Lightning flashed again. Ellie drew in a breath, and he lied, the most loving lie he ever told. "You'll be all right." She shook her head, sobbing. "I won't. I can't live without you." Ellie's voice softened. "Yes, you can. You always could." The blacksmith cocked the gun. Ellie whispered, "Run when it's done." Elsie's scream shattered the storm. "No." Then the shot fired. The world cracked open. Ellie Carter fell back, blood mixing with rain, his body sinking into the mud that had raised him. His eyes never left Elsie. Even in death, they didn't close. They released her once Ellie went still, as if the death of one twin meant the curse had been broken, as if justice had been served. Elsie crawled across the mud, her trembling hands reaching for Ellie's lifeless body. She curled over him, rocking, keening, a sound so ancient it didn't belong to a human throat, a sound that came from the beginning of the world, from the first mother who lost the first child. One by one, the mob drifted away, shame sinking into their bones as the storm eased. Not one of them spoke, not one of them looked back. As the final lantern disappeared into the trees, dawn broke. A soft, pale light washed over the clearing, and in that quiet morning, Elsie Carter pressed her forehead to her brother's chest. "I'll see you in the next life," she whispered. No one knows how long she stayed there, but when the sun rose fully, warming the mountains, the forest fell silent, as if honoring the dead, and by midday the cabin stood empty. Elsie Carter was gone. Some say she walked into the woods and never came back. Some say she followed the river until it carried her away. Some swear they saw her wandering the ridges for years, singing a lullaby only the wind could understand. But most believe she died of grief that very morning, her spirit slipping quietly into the earth beside Elise. When people tell the story of the Carter twins now, they rarely speak of sin. They speak of sorrow. They speak of two children abandoned by the world long before they broke its rules. They speak of fear, how it can twist good men into executioners. But above all, they speak of love, a love that never should have happened. A love that destroyed them, a love the mountains still remember, because in the end the Carter twins were not a warning about wickedness. They were a warning about loneliness, what happens when a community turns its back on its children. What happens when judgment is louder than compassion? What happens when hatred wears the mask of righteousness? The last dawn of the Carter twins reminds the mountains of a truth older than Appalachia itself. When people are isolated, they do not become monsters by nature, they become what the world forces them to be. And somewhere in the ridges, when the fog rolls low, some swear you can still hear Elsie whispering Ellie's name.